Well, hello, welcome back to the basement. On this episode, we tackle perhaps the most important part of this entire build, and that, of course, is this moth flying around, getting all up in the shot. This is not a tutorial. Well, hello, welcome back to the basement. On this episode, we tackle perhaps the most important part of this entire build, and that, of course, is the speakers. Now, if you remember on the very first episode, we took out this speaker, and this had a giant hole in it. And as a result, we're going to recone both of them. Now, I will say this episode is not meant to be a tutorial. I have no idea what I'm doing. I've never done a recone on any speaker of any kind ever before, so this will be my first 2 attempts. Hopefully I'll get it right the first time. If not, like I said, I've got some speakers from another cab that I can use that might actually be a little bit better. But I want to try and use the original factory speakers. Now these are, from what I'm told, all the research I did online said that they were Marshlands, but when I took them to Northwest Speaker, my man Ron looked at them and said with very little effort that these were CTS speakers, in which case, if had I known that, I probably could have just ordered the kits. But he was nice enough to piece together some components that were close to it. Now these are not the factory original type of cones. They are the same type, but they are a little bit deeper than the original, so I'm going to have to cut the opening out to accommodate the voice coil, and that is a little bit of a tricky proposition. So I'm not exactly excited about that. Same thing with the dust caps. He at least found the same type, that being felt, but these are much, much bigger. I could just go ahead and use these without trimming them. I may end up doing that. We'll see what it looks like. I may end up trimming them, I may not. We'll decide as we go. The thing that most concerns me is the fact that I don't have the right kind of shims. I'm going to be stuck using index cards and paper for the shims to keep the voice coil spaced from the internal pole magnet inside the speaker. I've got all the pieces that I need to get. I've got spiders, I've got cones, I've got voice coils, I've got dust caps, I've got edge gaskets, I've got a myriad of types of adhesives for all these different components. So, I'm a little bit nervous to say the least, but I think we're going to give it a go, and hopefully it turns out well. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we got to do is we got to clean up the existing speaker. Now the cool thing is he left the spider attached to the original voice coil, so I'll at least be able to get an idea of what kind of height we're looking for full articulation of the voice coil within the speaker basket itself. So we don't need this anymore. Alright, so he's already disassembled the speaker to get an idea of what kind of components I needed to get. Yeah, this is going to be a challenge to say the least, but I'm excited. I think this is going to be a fun project. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to take some masking tape and I'm going to seal off this gap right here. So this gap around the pole magnet, that's the gap in which the voice coil is going to travel, and we don't want anything in there that's going to cause any kind of scratching. So that's the very first thing that I'm going to do. Alright, so this was probably the most frustrating part of the entire recone process, was trying to figure out the right combination of tools or solvents or cleaners to get these remnants of the speaker cone off. I mean, granted, this is 45-year-old contact cement that's holding this speaker cone onto this basket. So I started off with a chisel tip X-Acto blade and a dull razor blade, and it sort of worked, but I started to get pretty frustrated pretty quick.
So then I go to sandpaper. Start off with 240 grit, that doesn't work. Then I go to 120 grit. It helps, but it's not coming off as quick as I want it to. So now I go to a Dremel tool, and that seemed to just melt the glue and make a big mess. So now I try a couple different solvents. I go to paint thinner. Next I go to goof off, which I don't have enough of left. The goof off seems to want to work, but I don't have enough to finish the job. So I get frustrated and just go back to the Dremel tool and get all the big chunks of it off. This is just a little small wire wheel that's on there. So I melt it down, weaken it up, and then I just go back with a razor blade, and now it starts to really come off. So I'm pleased with how it's coming off now. It just, this part of the process was taking me a lot longer than I expected to. What do you expect? It's 45-year-old glue. So I'm going to clean up all of my razor marks with some 120 grit sandpaper, just get it as clean as I possibly can so I can get a good seal when I go to glue that speaker basket back down. I'm making sure the edges are good. Alright, so I'm doing a test fit. Now I got to do where the spider connects to the speaker basket. So I repeat the same process of the wire wheel and the Dremel tool, followed by the 120 grit sandpaper, and it comes pretty clean. Look at all those metal shavings that are stuck to that magnet gap on the tape. So glad I taped that down. Alright, so now I'm cleaning it down to make sure I get all the dust particles off. I still managed to get a couple of the little pieces of wire from the Dremel tool down into the speaker basket, or down into the voice coil cavity. So I go down and shop vac it out, and then I come back with some tape and put it to a couple scraps of the index cards, and that really seems to work, but I find that the thinner piece of index card and tape gets down in there and conforms to the circle a lot better. So I do that a few times until nothing comes up on the tape, and we're good to go. And I'm test fitting the voice coil. Now I'm trying to figure out what kind of shim I can use, and it turns out these index card strips is the exact perfect size, just enough to put friction on it to keep the voice coil suspended. So I'm pretty happy. So now I'm test fitting the spider and trying to decide what glue I want to use. So here's the interesting part. So I'm looking at the old voice coil and spider and looking at the gap between the top of the coil and the spider, and I notice that it's not the same number of coil windings. So what I end up doing is I'm looking for travel. So I put an index card in there, I mark off, push the index card all the way to the bottom, and I place a mark on the index card. Once I do that, I take a look at the distance between the mark and the end of the card, and I make another mark about halfway down. And then I use that to set the depth relative to the spider, because I don't want I don't want the voice coil bottoming out on the bottom of the speaker, and I don't want it going up so far if I like slap the low E string that it pops out and doesn't go back in. So that's how I set the depth. We'll see if it works. So now I'm getting ready to choose the glue, and I'm going to go with that really thick super glue that I got from Northwest Speaker. So what I'm starting with is just sealing the voice coil to the spider. Spray a little catalyzer on there to speed up the drying process. So now I'm going to shim it up and glue down the spider. Once again, the little catalyzer spray on there, and it's done. So now this part is kind of scary because I got to actually trim the paper cone. So what I'm doing is I'm putting the voice coil as a template on the speaker cone, and I'm taping it down to keep it from moving, and I'm placing a pencil mark. I'm trying to do as careful a job as I can to keep it centered, which proved to be difficult on the second one, not so much on the first one. But I got it fixed, and then just simply scribed around the pencil mark with an X-Acto blade, and then kind of widen it a little bit, and it fits nice and snug. So I went ahead and did both cones at the same time since I already had it marked out. Everything fits well. So now I'm going to do a dry fit of the speaker cone, and it looks pretty good. Now with that dust cap, there is a big difference between the factory original dust cap and the replacement one. So the replacement one covers everything. The factory original is actually meant to sit straight on top of the voice coil, and that's it. It doesn't cover up the joint between the paper cone and the voice coil. So I wanted to cover that up. I felt like that was a better choice. Certainly the easier choice, definitely the path of least resistance. So that's what I ended up going with. So now I poked some new holes for the lead wires to go through. Then I traced around the actual paper cone once it was centered up to reference where I needed to put my bead of glue using the same super glue. What I did is I sprayed the catalyzer on the back side of the paper cone before I stuck it down. So as soon as those two met, it started to make a nice tight seal, and I sprayed it down with the catalyzer again. Now I'm attaching the voice coil to the speaker cone. That's all set, making sure that before I glue any of that down, that I put the holes in the lead wires matching the terminal. Now I'm checking the articulation of the cone, making sure there's no scratching of the voice coil, and everything seems good. So now I'm running the leads to the terminal block in the back of the speaker. And then I'm quickly realizing I should have done that beforehand. So now I'm just putting a battery to the voice coil before I start soldering anything up, just to make sure that everything works. And it does, so I'm good to go. No rubbing or scratching of the voice coil on the magnet, so I'm feeling pretty good about that. I'm going to take a little solder and tin up the leads to the speaker terminal, both ends. So now I'm trying to figure out, how am I going to solder that? Eventually I figure it out that I can actually solder from both sides, and that ends up being pretty awesome. So it ended up being way easier than I thought. So I soldered one end to the terminal block, one end to the lead wire of the voice coil, and we're good to go. So I wasn't sure what glue to dress it with, so I got some automotive weather stripping glue, but that seemed to be not very fun to work with, so I ended up just, because I'm covering up anyway, I just ended up super gluing the voice coil leads to the cone. I took a little bit of masking tape to make a handle for the dust cover. That seemed to work well to center it up. Ended up putting an extra bead of super glue around the outside edge after it was already down. I really didn't need to do that. Alright, so now I'm dry fitting the gasketing and thinking, you know what, I really need to put down this polyvinyl sealer around the ridges of that cone, because that's where all the movement takes place in the cone, and that polyvinyl sealant is meant to add years of life to that. Then I go to open up the bottle and it comes out like silly putty. So that's not going to work. So yeah, I ordered a replacement through Amazon, and this replacement bottle came the same way. So I got frustrated and just went with what I had that I knew would be flexible and wouldn't destroy the paper because there's no acid in it. which was some Elmer's rubber cement. So I ended up doing 3 or 4 coats on it. If you notice, this speaker is different than the last one you saw on camera. That's because, well, in the testing process, I managed to drop one of the battery packs to my LED lights right through the paper cone and totally destroyed it. So this is the replacement. So I didn't get to recone both speakers, but I got to do the same one twice. Really, really frustrating, but I still have the original factory one that still works and sounds actually fine. So the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to do a shootout and comparison between the reconed speaker, the factory original, then I've got a 1969 Eminence squareback and a 1974 Eminence squareback, which is the same year as the cabinet and the head. So I'm going to shoot out those 4 speakers on the next episode. We'll see which pairing sounds the best, and that's what we're going to install in this Traynor YT15. So until then, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.